The bike is back in the garage and the fairings are all fixed. But the first time you tipped into a corner after that crash, your hands froze. You're not riding anymore, you're just surviving the trip. This ghost in your head is a biological response to trauma, and it makes you a liability to yourself. But when a MotoGP rider low sides at like 100 miles an hour, they sprint back to the pits, get on their second bike, and set a lap record before the session is even over. Now, they aren't necessarily braver than you are, but what they do have is a system for processing this kind of trauma in real time. Now, most people will tell you to just push through it or get back in the saddle or take it as a sign to quit. But that's all garbage advice. Today, I'm giving you a technical roadmap to reset your nervous system and rebuild trust with your tires using the same principles that the pros use to stay fast. But listen, getting over a crash isn't about forcing yourself to feel better. It's about giving your brain evidence that things are under control. And this starts with an honest post-mortem assessment. You can't fix your head if you don't know why the bike went down. So look, let's set the tone here. Your ego is a lot like an airbag system. It inflates the instant you leave the saddle to protect you from the reality that your inputs and the laws of physics just had a very loud, expensive argument. And so for the next few minutes, we need to let the air out of the bag. We aren't here to point fingers or to have a cry. We're here because the moment you stop blaming bad luck and look at what actually happened, you stop being a victim of a random event and start being a rider with a technical problem to solve. So maybe you were treating the front brake like a light switch, or perhaps you asked the rear tire for more grip than it actually had to give. Either way, once we name the mistake, we can fix the fear. All right, so let's go for a ride.
So before we really get into this, let's take a second and let's talk about crashing for a minute. It's a little cold, gotta close the visor. There are unavoidable crashes, right? Those situations that we can't predict or prevent, right? That unexpected mechanical failure, the oil across the road, wildlife that jumps out of nowhere and just hits you. And those 1,000,000-to-1 crashes, while they do occur, they're harder for us to recover from because it just feels so random. But we have to admit that they're also far more rare than we'd like to admit. You see, our brain is good at protecting our ego, right? So it's easier for us to justify a mistake by saying, oh, well, it was the tire that failed, or it was oil, or it was gravel in the corner, or whatever else there was. So the first step in all of this is we really need to be honest with ourselves, right? Like, I don't care what you say to your spouse or to your coworkers or your buddies. Inside your head, just be honest with yourself, right? Without judgment and without excuses. And this isn't about blame. This is about control. Because when we identify what's in our influence, even if it's just partial, then crashes stop feeling like random events waiting to ambush us. Champ School has a whole theory on this. And I'm a champion certified coach with 25 years of experience. And I've been helping riders kind of overcome this for years, right? And Champ School was able to identify 7 reasons why we crash. Let's go over those really quickly. The number one reason why we crash is a loss or lack of focus. We get distracted. Maybe we started the ride out distracted. We're not really paying attention. Number one. Number two, this is a big one. It's abruptness, right? And this can be caused by a lot of different things, looking down or loss or lack of focus. When we're abrupt with our brake input, with our throttle input, or even our steering input, it can overwhelm or surprise the tire before the bike or the chassis knows what to do with it. Number 3 is rushing corner entrance, right? We go into corners too fast, and I would add to that rushing corner exit, when we go back to the throttle too soon before we're pointed out of the corner, or too abruptly while the bike is still at lean angle. Number 4 would be repeating mistakes, right? It's, we make a mistake once, but if we keep repeating that same mistake, it starts to compound, then it catches up to us. Or trying to do the same thing, expecting a different result, repeating mistakes. Number 5 is cold tires. This is a big one. It catches a lot of people out, and ironically, it catches more people out when the weather's warm, because that's when we start taking our grip for granted. And then we have overconfidence. I've fallen into this one where we get so confident with our training and our skill and our expertise that we start becoming complacent. So we get a little bit too ambitious at the wrong time and overconfidence. And then failure to adapt. This is probably the biggest one. The temperature changes, our tires wear, traffic conditions change, we're fatigued or we're dehydrated, and we fail to adapt to those changing conditions. It's raining now and we're still trying to ride at the same pace we were riding when it was dry and our tires were warm. But this is where honesty really kind of comes in, because when we can be honest and look at the reason why we crashed and put it into one of those 7 buckets, it gives us something substantial and concrete and tangible to work on, instead of just carrying this vague sense around with us that riding is dangerous and unpredictable. All right, let's go find a pretty place to stop and talk.
Now, the first thing that really works is something called graded exposure, and it sounds more complicated than it is. All it means is that instead of avoiding the thing that scared you or throwing yourself straight back into it at full intensity, you rebuild confidence in deliberate, ordered steps. After a crash, your brain is very good at linking specific situations with danger, a certain corner, a certain lane angle, hard braking, carrying too much entry speed. And if you avoid these things completely, the fear tends to grow. But if you force yourself into them too quickly, the fear spikes and reinforces the idea that you're not ready. Neither one of those actually help you recover. So make a list of those things, being honest about what feels uncomfortable versus what feels overwhelming, and then writing that list down from least to most threatening. Not necessarily from a logical point of view, but for how you feel about them. Gentle cornering at an easy pace might feel tense but manageable, while adding real lean and speed still feels terrifying. That becomes your roadmap. You start at the lowest stress item on the list and you practice it until your anxiety drops. Your movements feel smooth again. Only then do you move to the next thing on your list. But this part is critical. The practice must resemble real riding, and this is where a lot of riders fall into the parking lot trap. If the thing you're struggling with involves lean angle, tire grip, or cornering load, riding slow circles in a parking lot doesn't give your brain useful information. Not to mention, you're not generating heat in the tires or cornering load. You're not creating or recreating the conditions that actually triggered the fear in the first place. Instead, you need to mimic real-world riding, real corners, real lines, real braking zones, gradually adding speed, lean, and complexity in a way that matches how you actually ride. I mean, that's how your nervous system learns that this skill itself isn't the problem. So maybe go out first thing Sunday morning and find a quiet, empty county road instead of a parking lot. But the key is repetition without consequence. Each time you repeat a feared movement in a realistic context and nothing bad happens, your brain updates the story that it's telling you. It stops treating the situation as a threat and starts recognizing it as something demanding but manageable. Over time, that's what turns fear back into focus and hesitation back into control. Now, the second theory is a piece that comes from a process called cognitive behavioral theory. And again, the name makes it sound more complicated than it is. At its core, this is about learning to recognize and correct the stories your brain tells you after a crash. I mean, after a trauma, it's very common for thoughts to jump straight to worst case conclusions. I am going to crash again. I cannot trust myself. One mistake means I'm not cut out for this. And those thoughts feel automatic and convincing, but they also drive hesitation and tension on the bike. So the first step is simply noticing them and getting them out of your head and onto paper. Write down the specific thought that shows up before or during a ride, not the polite version, the actual sentence that your brain keeps repeating. And that alone creates a little bit of distance between you and the fear. Next, you look for evidence, not feelings. On one side of the page, list the evidence that supports the negative thought, but on the other side, list the evidence against it. Successful rides before the crash, years of riding without incident, similar situations that you've handled well. And when you see it written out, those two catastrophic thoughts start to lose some of their authority. And then from there, you replace the absolute statement with something more accurate and usable. So instead of, I cannot trust myself, it becomes, I made a mistake at the limit, and I know what to adjust to reduce the chances of repeating it. Doing this regularly helps you catch patterns like all or nothing thinking and catastrophizing before they spiral. Over time, that mental noise quiets down and your attention goes back to where it belongs, on the ride itself. And this approach is well supported in sports psychology. When athletes consistently use these kinds of tools, anxiety drops and confidence comes back, not because fear disappears, but because it stops running the show. This third piece is one that a lot of riders either dismiss or use in a way that doesn't really help. When done correctly, it's one of the fastest ways to rebuild trust in your own abilities, and the idea is simple. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. It's crazy how your brain actually works. When you remember something, you're not actually remembering the event, you're remembering the last time you remembered it. So use that to our advantage. So instead of replaying the crash or mistake on a loop, you intentionally rehearse success. Just a few minutes a day. You picture yourself riding the exact situation that went wrong, but this time, executing it cleanly. The same corner, the same braking zone, the same turn in, but this time with smooth inputs, calm body movements, visual focus, everything happening the way that it should have. The key is to make it detailed. Don't just see it from the outside like a movie. Feel the bike underneath you, hear the engine, see your reference points coming towards you at the right speed. Feel the brake pressure build and then release it smoothly. Feel the bike settle as you add lean, see the exit, get the bike pointed, and then roll on the throttle once you can see it. The more sensory detail you include, the more useful the rehearsal becomes. And once that starts to feel easy and natural, you take it one step further. You add small challenges. Maybe the wind picks up, or there's gravel near the entrance, or maybe your line isn't perfect, or maybe you enter a little bit hotter than you planned. Then you watch yourself adjust calmly and stay in control. This matters because real riding is never perfect, and durable confidence doesn't come from imagining ideal conditions. It comes from seeing yourself adapt without panic. And this kind of mental rehearsal keeps those neural pathways active, even when you're not yet ready to push physically. It reinforces the idea that the skill is still there, that the solution works, and that you can handle variation without things falling apart. Over time, that imagined success starts to feel familiar. And when you go back to the real thing, it no longer feels like unknown territory. And when used alongside graded exposure and honest assessment, imagery helps close the gap between knowing what to do and trusting yourself to do it again. That's right, I did say I have a bonus for you, and here it is, and it supports everything else, doesn't replace anything. But after a crash, anxiety often shows up physically before you even notice it mentally. Your grip will tighten, your shoulders will tense up, and your movements get really stiff. And that tension isn't just uncomfortable, it literally makes the bike harder to ride. Now, the simplest way to interrupt that is with breathing. Before a ride, take a few minutes to slow your system down. Breathe in through your nose, into your belly, and then breathe out slowly, longer than the inhale. You're not trying to relax completely, you're just bringing your baseline stress down. So you're not starting the ride all wound tight. On the bike, it helps to pair that with some very simple physical cues, things you can check without thinking when you notice it. You take a breath and you correct. One is faster eyes. If you notice yourself staring at the pavement or the problem, deliberately lift your vision, look further ahead, and breathe. Another one is smoother brakes, not more braking or less braking, just calmer, more deliberate pressure and release. You can inhale as you squeeze the brake and exhale is your roll on the throttle. And then the third one is using your feet more. Inhale as you lift your heel and put your weight on the inside peg. Weighting the peg and stabilizing the bike with your lower body takes load off of your hands and arms, which naturally reduces tension. I go into this much deeper in our whole video about foot control. But the goal with all of this isn't to eliminate fear. It's to keep from locking up while you're rebuilding trust. When your breathing is steady and your movements are loose, everything else you're working on has a chance to actually stick. Now listen, if you're coming back from a crash, remember this. Recovery isn't a straight line. Some rides will feel great, others might not, but that doesn't mean that you're failing. It means that you're rebuilding confidence the right way. Be patient with yourself, stick to the process, and focus on giving your brain proof instead of pressure. I mean, that's how riding starts to feel like riding again. All right, now one quick note, because we do have two channels, this and our podcast channel. The YouTube channel membership doesn't make as much sense. So we've created a Patreon, and there's no obligation at all. But if you want to help support the work that we do across both channels, it truly helps, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. Ride on and ride well.